If the Vikings strike out on a quarterback, one of the guys they could take is Laiatu Latu, an edge out of UCLA. And I think he is a great example to talk about the pass rushing rule of threes. What do I mean by that? That's what we're doing today on the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, where we're always trying to learn something new. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And thank you so much for those of you who do come listen to this show every single day or watch it on YouTube. I appreciate you all so very much. If you are new here, you want to maybe become an everydayer, hey, you can search out this show Monday through Friday, every morning on your favorite podcasting place, whether it's an app like SiriusXM, or you can find this show on YouTube. If you want to watch me wildly gesticulate while we talk, you can also find the show on Amazon Fire and Roku if you download the Locked On Minnesota Sports app. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. It's $150 win or lose. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. And today on the show, I'm going to be a little more esoteric because I want to talk about a particular concept of pass rushing and kind of use Laiatu Latu as the example of that. He's an edge out of UCLA. He's a lot of people's first edge in this class. I think it's like most people have like him or Dallas Turner. I got chopped. That makes me weird. Don't ask. Don't worry about it. All right, I'm doing my thing. But he's definitely one of the top guys. And there's been mocks where he's like the first defender off the board, right? Like really high guy. A few mock, like of all of the like times you'll see like a national mock draft, and a lot of times those national mock drafts will be like no trades, and then therefore the Vikings don't get a quarterback. They're all gone in the top four because if the Vikings aren't allowed to trade up, and then they'll like just stick us with the edge rusher and it'll be Latu. So worth talking about, but also there is this thing that I'm going to call the pass rushing rule of three. And it is a great way to set up and build a pass rush so I learned this from a college defensive line coach who was talking about it in the context of like building somebody from scratch, like teaching a kid how to pass rush from the ground up, right? Like a kid who didn't know football. And to kind of give them, so you don't overwhelm them, to give them kind of three moves. But I actually think that it's like it's a good way to live. And it's the way that a lot of the college players that played for this coach would live. So it's not like it's something that's only like for JV and middle schoolers, right? And the idea is it's kind of like baseball. In a baseball, think of a pitcher who's got his fastball. That's his bread and butter. That's all, that's the one that you're going to do over and over and over and over again. You'll mess with the placement and stuff, and you'll have nuanced and detailed changes there. But, your fastball is going to be your kind of go-to. And then you'll mix it up sometimes with a curveball. And hopefully that if they get too keyed in and they kind of fall asleep on your fastball, you can get them with the curveball. And then you've got something that's way out of, should I say way out of left field? I feel like it's because we're talking baseball. I feel like I shouldn't do that. But something that's kind of out of the blue, like a changeup, right? So I have your fastball, your curveball, your changeup. Most players, I would say, the fastball is either the bull rush or the speed rush if you're an edge rusher. If you're a D tackle, it's probably always going to be the bull rush. If you're a speed rusher, it's going to be, or if you're an edge rusher, it's a lot of times it's the speed rush. And that's going to be your fastball. And all I mean by speed rush is get up and around, right? Just get off the ball fast, get up and around, just try to be fast enough to get around the tackle. That's your kind of bread and butter go-to, right? And honestly, you're probably not going to win a ton of reps just on a speed rush, or maybe it's like a dip and rip where you're trying to dip your shoulder, rip underneath, right? And get your, and get past them that way or something like that, right? And you see the bendy around the corner. If you're winning with your speed rush a whole bunch, you're either up against a nasty, atrocious tackle, like if we're watching college tape, right? You're either up against just like a dreadfully bad tackle, or you're the most special player alive. Like if you're just winning with speed all the time, that's pretty hard to do. But the speed rush is really, you want to establish the speed rush. That's really what it's there, because you're going to use your curveball later, and speed and then converting that into power where you kind of plant a leg and then go from a speed rush where you're hoping you get the tackle like kick sliding really hard, and you hopefully get him using a lot of energy to move backwards, and then you just power right into him while he's not set up and he's still trying to get his position. That speed to power is a great curveball there, where it sort of subverts what you use to set it up. And then the changeup for a lot of pass rushers will be something totally out of left field, something like a spin or something like that. Or this is where you'd get like a scissor step, or you'd get some kind of like inside move or something like that. Whatever that player is comfortable with, whatever that player feels like they're really good at, right? Super different for Latu. And that's why I think he's an interesting guy to talk about with this. Because for him, he absolutely loves the cross chop. I would say the 3 moves I saw the most from him are the cross chop and then rip and swim. But it wasn't like a speedy dip and rip that you would usually see. And if you don't know what those are, don't worry, I'll get to it. But the interesting thing is, in terms of how those were distributed, he was just kind of mixing up those 3. There wasn't like a bread and butter and then a subversion. There wasn't it didn't seem like there was like a philosophy to when he would choose one over the other, right? He's just doing the one that he kind of felt like, maybe I'll get him with a swim this time, that kind of deal. Or sometimes it would be, and this is really cool, it would be like reacting to the, whatever, it's that Bruce Lee quote, that if you ask any defensive line coach to like give them the Bruce Lee quote, they'll all know it. And it's like the best technique is no technique. Your movement is my movement, or something like that. And it's I think it was Bruce Lee. I apologize if I misquoted, if I misattributed that. But that's the idea that I think Latu's like going, which is really sweet, right? Like that's awesome. If that's what he's doing, if he's going, well, this guy kind of did a weak pass set, so I'm going to try to rip underneath him because he didn't get enough depth, or maybe he got too much depth, so I'm actually going to, step outside and then try to swim to the inside of him, or I'm going to do, he punched too early, so that's when I'm going to do the cross chop. So here's what those moves are. You probably know what a swim move is. You've probably seen one of those on TV, right? And you get, right, like the swim over the top. So a rip is actually the same motion as a swim. It's the same steps. It's the same setup and everything like that. But instead of your arm going over, your arm goes under and you rip it underneath. And hey, when you see a rip move, O-lineman can hold. Here's a fun fact for the day. So if you're going to complain about holding, first check if it was a rip move or not. Because if it was a rip move, the refs won't call it. And then the cross chop is, or I know it too, as like a scissor step. And it's kind of the same thing. So you take a really long, like almost like a gallop step laterally across the guy's face. So you'll do like a jab step. And Latu's jab step in particular, really violent, and it'll get guys, right? Like it's really pronounced and it's great for faking. So that you want to jab to, let's say, their outside shoulder, right? And try to make it look like you're about to try to get up to up that gap, so that he's got to react, and the lineman's going to start going to the outside, and then you get as much lateral distance as possible, which means you honestly jump and you'll leap, and that's you call it a scissor step because your legs go apart like scissors and then come back together, and then while you do that, both of your hands will chop the lineman's hands down, or sometimes they'll club them to the side. That's why you call it a cross chop, because you're actually chopping their hands down. This is his favorite thing to do. He loves doing it outside in. He loves doing it inside to out. This is extremely Unique Ngakoue coded. This is very so Unique Ngakoue is like the cross chop dude. If you want to watch a cross chop, go find Unique Ngakoue tape. That's like his move, and it is his fastball. And I think, honestly, Latu is kind of modeled his game a little bit like that, where the cross chop is a bit the fastball. And the rip and the swim are sort of recovery moves almost, or they're moves for like, they're reactive moves for when the lineman does something else, or when you just didn't have a cross chop loaded up. Now, I love the idea. You might have heard people say pass rush with a plan. I say it all the time too, pass rush with a plan. You want your defensive lineman to say, okay, this is the gap that I'm pass rushing today. What am I going to do? I'm going to jab, I'm going to do this step. I'm going to, then I'm going to club, then I'm going to rip, then I'm going to do this, then that, like, right. Like you want it to be a plan and not just kind of randomly throwing limbs around. But the reactivity of it is pretty cool, which I didn't even intend to talk about, but it's cool. So whatever. But there wasn't, to me at least, and I could be super wrong here, and if I am, I apologize to Laiatu Latu, but it didn't seem like the macro plan was there. Or if there was, I think that there's a better macro plan for him that might work better for him in the NFL. That might be something he transitions to in the NFL that utilizes the power that he has. He's a strong player, but he didn't use that power a lot. And that really showed up in a game against Arizona, against Jordan Morgan, who's also he's like a borderline first round tackle. He'll be like a late first rounder if I had to guess. And that game, phenomenal game to watch if you just want to learn O-line, D-line. Those two were at war with each other whenever he lined up on that side. And that's the game I want to talk about next. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by FanDuel, which is America's #1 sports book. Look, y'all are Minnesota Vikings fans. That means like 8 of 10 of you are also Timberwolves fans that are way into the NBA playoffs. So why don't you go lay down a buck, right? Go to FanDuel.com and go gamble on the Timberwolves to win their first series in 4, because, that's unless it's the Phoenix Suns, then they lose in 4. Sorry, everybody. That's the prophecy. Or you could go bet on the Twins. You could go bet on whatever's left of the Wild season. FanDuel is your place to gamble on every single game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 back on your first bet, win or lose. You can bet on anything from slam dunks, 3-point props, slap shot props, whatever, all on an app that is safe, secure, and easy to use. So go to FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Thanks a bunch for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. If you're looking for more Minnesota sports content, go to the 24/7 YouTube stream over at Locked On Minnesota Sports. All day long, there will be Minnesota sports content. Tons of talk, I'm sure, about what's going to happen in the NBA playoffs with the Timberwolves and their jockeying for the first seed. Plus some talk about the Wild season and sort of what went wrong, and the Twins season as it gets going. Plus a bunch of Viking stuff, the roundtables, everything you love at Locked On Minnesota Sports as well. Okay, so this Jordan Morgan game. Genuinely, email me, lockedonvikingspodcast@gmail.com. I will send you the tape cut up because it is a really sick, or just go to Caddy's Cut-Ups on Patreon. It's $2 a month. You get a whole bunch of tape on all the prospects. It's a gold mine. I cannot believe he lets you do that for $2 a month. It's truly the hero of our time, Caddy's Cut-Ups. And if you want to go grab that and just watch those two guys when they go up against each other, because they both are playing really, really well. And you can see a good pass set versus a good pass rush. What wins? Depends on the play. It's back and forth. It's awesome, awesome, awesome ball. In my opinion, Jordan Morgan got the best of him in this game. Got the best of Latu. And the way he did that was with a really disciplined. I love Jordan Morgan, by the way. This game is my only exposure to him because I didn't watch him as a tackle. But man, if that's the way he always plays, that dude can play. It's really good pass set, really good timing, really disciplined timing. One of the things with that cross chop that can get the pass rusher in trouble is if the tackle is patient with his hands. There is a moment where you can, if you time it right, you can counter it beautifully and you can get a pancake out of it. So think about it, right? You are jab stepping and then you're laterally stepping and you're probably jumping. So there's a moment where you're in the air and you're chopping hands down to keep them off of you to defend yourself while you're in the air. Because while you're in the air, you don't have a lot of leverage. It's not the best place to be. So you got to defend yourself versus that. And the way the cross chop really works is if that jab step is a good enough sell, you can draw a punch out from the tackle. And the tackle's hands come out, or maybe one hand comes out, right? And you can now jump away from those hands, knock them away, and you'll be on the ground by the time those hands have a time to reset and come back to you. But with Jordan Morgan, he didn't fall for it. He did a great job of just not taking that bait. And therefore, he was able to use his power and then just outmuscle Laiatu Latu. once you were there. Now it's just, you can get it to a point where it's just like kind of my weight room versus your weight room. And Jordan Morgan won that battle and managed to get like a really good leverage and really good angles just by timing the punch properly. And I think in the NFL, you see too many of those where like you could have games where that cross chop just disappears on you. And just you'll never, ever get past somebody on that, which means as a fastball, it's kind of a risky fastball to have where if that tackle has the counterpunch to you and you're just never going to beat him on the Lions' share of plays, and it doesn't really bait anything, right? I mean, you have that jab step and stuff, but it's not like you're baiting a big lunge. You're baiting patient hands. You don't really want to like trick the lineman into having patient hands, right? And subverting that is kind of hard, especially with like the swim or the rip. And these things aren't like playing off of each other. It's just sort of like pass rush move salad. So if you're going to go up against a guy like that, you might want to reconstruct not the way you rush the passer, not the moves that you have and all the work you've put in to learn them, but just like the moments and order in which you deploy them. And for this to work, for my suggestion here to be at all salient, I have to be right about Latu's power, and you got to be a little speculative about that, right? Whenever you're watching the trenches, at the end of the day, you're watching two guys push on each other, and you're watching one maybe get purchase on the other and move the other back. But in terms of whether they're winning because they're powerful or whether they're winning because they've got like leverage on it, or they're winning because the other guy just isn't very powerful and it makes, the winner look more powerful than he is, that's a lot harder to discern. So that's where, multiple games and considering strength of opponent and all that stuff helps. But at the end of the day, that's all just context that helps you make a better guess, but it's still a guess. So my guess is that Latu is a very powerful player and that a bull rush can help him, but also that the cross chop that he really, really likes is maybe better used as the changeup instead of the fastball. That's going to be like the pitch, the plan that I would have were he to come into my NFL D-line room that they let me run for some reason. Like that would be, I guess, the way that I would approach that. And that would be like that wouldn't be like a fix that takes time. That's a strategic change, not like a technique change that you have to drill a whole bunch and spend a bunch of practice time on. You just have to say, hey, maybe rely on this one instead of that one. And he goes, okay, coach. And then you had one conversation and it's over, right? And the only reason that wouldn't happen is because whoever his actual D-line coach is doesn't agree with me, which that would be fair. I'm a podcaster. But going into that Arizona game, and I think that Arizona game is like going to turn some people off to Latu, which I think is naive, just because like one of the skills of this that's a really hard skill is how to differentiate like a good win or a bad loss from a loss to just a really good pass set, right? And if you're watching somebody like Jordan Morgan, who's one of the top tackles in the class, you're one of the top tackles in the whole nation, right? You're going to go like, oh, all right, well, like I will accept more losses because I'm watching against that guy. And that's great to have that familiarity with who the guy is and have all the big names familiar with all the big names and know who you're looking at. But at the end of the day, you're still only assuming that was a good rep just because you understand that guy to have good reps. The real skill is in being able to look at two players, not know who either of them is, and differentiate who had the good rep and who had the bad rep. Or if they both had the good rep and one won and one lost, being able to see like, oh man, that was a great rep for both players, but somebody's got to win, right? And being able to differentiate that is a really, really difficult thing. And a very skillful thing that when I've like had the pleasure to watch tape with people who know a lot more than me, when they're able to do that, it's really eye-opening for me and humbling. And I think that Jordan Morgan game is definitely one of those cases where like, wow, that was like a fine setup. Like Latu did everything perfectly fine, but that was just a really good pass set and he lost. All right, fair enough. So don't overreact to that game too much is I guess what I'm trying to say. But that game does sort of shine a spotlight on maybe a way that his pass rush game could improve, which is just a strategic thing. But to go back to the like kind of patty cake, being too finessey with a tight end thing, like a swim, a rip, a cross chop, these are all very techniquey moves. They're all very quick moves. They're moves for guys that don't just want to stand up and go right through. I shouldn't say stand. The guys don't just want to get out of their stance and go straight through a tackle, right? And you'll see that kind of pass rush repertoire on guys like on your DJ Wanhams, your guys that like your whole game is being quick instead of powerful. And that's the kind of like pass rush that you see with that guy. So with Latu, he has that kind of game. That's a guy that like just doesn't believe a lot in his power. So it's a lot of hand fighting. And like the way he moves his hands, it's quick, it's really consistent, it's polished, it's beautiful. And it's every single play. He's doing all this wax on, wax off with it. And going back to how Jordan Morgan was able to kind of parry all that stuff away, he had hands that were a good match that did like actually hold their water against all this Mr. Miyagi that Laiatu Latu was doing, and was able to time those punches. And ultimately, in setting up all that hand fighting, he didn't have a great leverage spot, and he would get caught, not unlike, being caught in the air with a cross chop, but he would get caught right in the dip when he was trying to dip under on a rip, and he would take a pancake that way, that kind of thing. Or if you swim, it's the same thing. You got your hand up, you're exposing your ribs, right? And you're going to get punched in the ribs. I don't know about you, but my ribs don't push on things very well. So you're going to get washed out of the play if you're not quick about that spin move, or if the tackle just times it perfectly. And that's what Jordan Morgan was able to do in that game. That's why I was like so enamored by that one game. Now, maybe that was an outlier or something like that. Who knows? I don't think so, though, because everybody's got him as a first rounder. So I don't know. I'm a fan. But let's look to the future here. So if, let's say, Laiatu Latu's a Viking, what do I tell him if I'm the D-line coach, right? I think that's a great exercise to go through, is play a little bit of pretend and say, okay, what would I do about this that would, maximize him? How do I grow him the best that I can? That'll be next. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by eBay Motors. Look, your car is an extension of who you are, right? It gets you from point A to point B, and it's probably a significant part of your life and your lifestyle, but it also is an expression, right? It's the car that you like. It's the car that you picked, and it maybe is the car that you've had for a long time. I've had my car that I'm actually getting a new one, but I've had it for 16 years. It is truly a part of my life, and taking good care of it has always been really important to me. But hey, sometimes you're looking for a deal, or maybe you need to look for a deal because maintenance can get expensive. So head on over to eBay Motors, where you will find a part that is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back. They have over 122 million parts for your car, so you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And again, guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it is easy to take great care of your car at eBay Motors. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay guaranteed fit only available to U.S. customers. All right, so here's the pitch, right? Here's a great thing that I've learned when you talk about improving a player, right? When you start to say, here's what I would do, here's the suggestion I would make, or whatever. Too often, and I'm bad at this, I got to get better at this. Too often I am in a fixing mindset. And this is just something that just totally changed my outlook when somebody said it to me. A fixing mindset, where I say, this is a problem, here's how I would fix it, right? Here's how I would overcome the imperfections in this player. And that's a bad mindset to have for like coaching. Instead, a growing mindset. Not how am I going to fix and create this perfect made in a lab player. And I think this is a big thing all over the draft community. It's not just me, is, okay, here's this player. He does everything good, but he's too short, right? And because that's something that isn't fixable, that becomes this like bigger blemish for somebody or whatever. Or whatever the problem is, oh, he doesn't have a polished pass rush or whatever you want to say. And if he fixes that, then he's this good of a player. That's a fixing mindset. And instead of a mindset that identifies problems and then says, what if they didn't exist? What if we made it so these problems didn't exist? A growing mindset. If you had this player in your hands and you were going to mold them, how would you create the best player you think you could create? Not a perfect player. That's not a thing. Nobody is. So how will you maximize him? And I think that's the way that I've been trying to think about this a little bit more. So if I were to get my hands on Laiatu Latu, emphasizing that bull rush would be how I think you can get the most out of him. And changing which thing is which pitch, right? So that bull rush is great for, I think, him specifically because I think he would have a great future as a power guy in the NFL. You want to see a real power guy in this draft? Jared Verse. Jared Verse is very much a power guy out of Florida State. Latu does not play like a power guy, but I think he has the athleticism where he could be really successful as a power guy. And what's great is the bull rush is not exactly because it's just you get off your stance and hit him. Like it's not something you have to like really drill and teach like a whole thing, right? Like, of course, there's keys and details to unlock the bull rush, but it's one of the easier ones to become your bread and butter, right? But the bull rush baits things that I think the stuff that he loves to use are really good counter punches to. And instead of him kind of trying to make the whole plane out of the black box, he's taking these subversions, these counterpunches, these curveballs and changeups, and he can deploy them at a specific time. And I love this way of approaching the pass rush. Maybe it's just because I've spent the last 8 years watching Danielle Hunter, who's the god of this. I'm not going to apologize for that. But I love that way of doing it where, if you try if you try the cross chop every single play, you're going to get stopped a whole bunch because that's your move. Tackles are just going to know to be very patient with their hands and they're going to be able to counter you. But if you're bull rushing all the time, you're discouraging that patience. You're telling them, no, you got to get on me fast, right? You don't get to be patient with your hands. Throw that hand out right off the bat, right? Get both hands on me right away, right as I get off the ball, right on my get off. And now you're getting them to punch. And then when it's 3rd and 7 in a big moment, late in the third quarter, when, you're down a score and you need to stop really bad, then you pull out the cross chop and you jab step, right? And if that jab step is violent enough, which it's beautiful for Latu, if you've been bull rushing all day, that tackle is going to react differently to that. And manipulating that is the true, I think, evolution from the college game where you're just going to find some tackles that suck at a lot of stuff. And if you execute your pass rush moves well, you're going to have success in production, to the pro game where there ain't guys like that. Everybody executes their stuff well. And you can't just have good technique and win. You've got to think in a macro level. You got to think in that bigger picture. So we'll call that swim and that rip because they're kind of the same movement. It's just arm under or arm over. As sort of two sides of the same coin, and maybe it just depends on the height of the offensive lineman you're going against. Do you think it'd be easier to go over him or under him? But call that the kind of the curveball, right? Which again can be a really, if you're bull rushing a lot, if you're like a super power guy, like if you're really like just a muscle power rusher. Again, thinking on the offensive side of things, if you're an offensive tackle, you're going up against a super powerful power rusher. Who is the guy that I really liked? He just retired. Romeo Okwara, the main one. Because I know he had his brother, but the guy that actually was a starter. Very much a power guy, and the way that you would attack that, somebody like Darisaw is great at this. Would be like a short set, where you're just building your house, as so to speak, really, really fast. So you're not necessarily trying to slide. You're not trying to kick step. You're not trying to get any width or depth necessarily. It's great for quick game in particular, but against certain kinds of rushers, it can work as well, where you just like set up really fast. You just pick your feet up and put them down, get yourself on a nice stout base and throw a punch and essentially take the fight to the pass rusher. And so you don't get all this time to set up your fancy moves. I'm going to get right up into you. And for a bull rusher, that you take away that head of steam, right? And say, okay, you want to come collide and make this about muscle? Let's make this about muscle. Let's short set, right? Let's get right up into you. So let's say you have a tackle that's doing all those short sets on you, and you want to be a cross chop guy. So you're going to bull rush a whole bunch to make sure that he's doing those short sets on you. And then when you give that jab step to the outside and you fake, it's going to look a lot like it's just another bull rush. And that's what you want the lineman to think. It's just another bull rush. Just come, give me your short set. Let's go do the muscle thing. We've been doing this all day. And they're going to throw their hands out, and then you're going to be able, and they're probably going to set pretty far outside because you're going far outside. But really, all you're doing with that jab step is loading up your weight on that leg and then jumping and leaping and then doing the scissor step. You cross chop those hands away. Bam, you got them beat. And if you are judicious about when you deploy that, you can maximize its impact. If you just try to do it every play, not only will you have a harder time winning on all of those reps, but you don't really get to pick when the tackle screws up and lets you win a rep. But if you want to play it with a different fastball, use that cross chop as your changeup, your slider, right? It was Dave Steeb, right? The Dave Steeb slider, the John Boystock, I think is the slider was his thing, if I remember the John Boystock. But that nasty thing that you're just like known for, and you bring it out judiciously, you can have a lot more success. Not to say that Latu didn't have a lot of success or anything like that. And I really like Latu as a prospect. I super get why he's like, one of the first defenders off the board, most likely. But I think that's an interesting part of his game. And it gave me a chance to talk about this interesting thing that I find in pass rushing and this sort of macro game of pass rushing. So hopefully you learned something new on this one. And we're going to keep doing stuff like this. All right. I will talk to you next week. And as always, Skol.